Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. Today, the topic is Saved by the Bell, and that's the title of my essay this week, and the subtitle is Deny, Delay, Depose. So here in the United States, of course, everyone has been talking about the death of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, and this whole conversation has sort of erupted around what has happened. And I think there was a lot of maybe surprise from the number of people who responded to that death with stories of the ways that they have been denied health care, just how broken the system is here in the United States. And we are there's a very recent study from the Commonwealth Fund, which I linked in the essay. It's got unbelievable statistics and just about how broken our system is here. And we are the lowest. We're kind of the best at being the worst as far as healthcare goes. There's no safety net for our citizens here. And I really wanted to share some personal stories and then kind of talk about, how things are here and why I think the conversation that has arisen is maybe one that surprised people. I don't think it surprised anyone who has dealt with their insurance companies. But I think maybe people in other parts of the world might have been surprised, and certainly, there are people here in the States who have been doing some hand-wringing, but I have some feelings about that too. I mean, obviously, I am never going to be somebody who is condoning gun violence and, shooting people dead in the street, but, and I'm not even going to put a but after that, period. Also, I'm not surprised by the conversation. And, I think what we need to be talking about is the violence of a healthcare system that puts so many people in jeopardy. It is the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is medical debt. 530,000, over 500,000 families go into bankruptcy every year because of medical debt. 41% of Americans have medical debt. And this is people who have health insurance. I think we have 37 million people who do not have health insurance in our country and 41 million who have inadequate access. So those are just numbers that are floating around in my head because I've been, thinking about all this and writing about it. And one of the things that sort of came out of what has happened is this plan that Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield had to only cover anesthesia for medical procedures and surgeries up to a certain amount of time. They wanted to put time limits on anesthesia. And that was going to go into effect in February. They sort of quietly announced this change. And I think they were just thinking it was going to just go into effect and nobody was going to notice or fight it or whatever. And then, of course, we had this, this whole thing happen here. And when you have a violent system in place, which we do, that is systemic violence, okay? When people are dying or going bankrupt because the country that they live in, where they pay taxes and they do all the things they're supposed to do, is not, there's no safety net there. It's not, when violence erupts, it can't be a surprise to any of us. And we have violence everywhere. We have a lot of violence here right now that, it's not even under the surface. I mean, all the mass shootings and school shootings, we have an angry electorate. And I won't even call it an electorate, because a lot of the people who are feeling this violence and are victims of this violence are not even voting, so there's a lot of fear and anger and just despair, really, in our country, and it boils over frequently. And so it really shouldn't be a surprise anymore. But maybe some of those numbers I just put out there, maybe those are surprising. Those are incredibly high numbers of people dealing with medical debt and or bankruptcy in our country. That's a shocking number of people who have no care, and a shocking number of people who have inadequate care in a developed country. We are the lowest when it comes to developed countries as far as the health care that we're offering our people. And so there are two things. So this whole thing about anesthesia, and they did reverse that. They reversed that decision. That policy is not going to go into effect about time limits on anesthesia. But what happened for me when I heard that is I had something happen when I was 26 years old. It was the second time, I found a lump in my breast when I was 21. I was doing a self-check in the shower, and as I hope you do, if you have breasts, and even if you don't, men get breast cancer as well. Everybody should be doing self-checks, and the shower is a good place to do it. And you stick an elbow in the air, you put one hand behind your head, and with the other hand, with your fingertips, you should be, feeling around that whole area there, just as a regular thing. So there's that for my breast cancer awareness folks. For me, my maternal grandmother died of breast cancer. In her case, by the time they found it, it had spread to her lungs. It was everywhere. But she was 58 years old. She was very young. And so when you have breast cancer running in your family on your mother's side, you really want to be vigilant about checking. So I already knew that at 21, and I found a lump, and it was tiny. It was a pearl-shaped tiny lump, but I knew that it was not something I had felt before, and I could feel it moving underneath my fingertips. And I told my mom a couple days later. I was having lunch with her, and I said, I found something, like this lump, and she went white. And she instantly, and my mother, I was writing about, I've written about my mom a lot and spoken about her a lot, and I'm writing a whole memoir about my relationship with my mother. I mean, that's really the through line of it. But she was a very proper person in certain ways. She really cared about how things looked and seemed. She was always dressed, perfectly, and hair done, makeup done, jewelry, handbags, shoes, like everything. My mother did not own sweats. She owned like a couple pair of like dressy jeans. She just was not, she's very put together. And even in the apartment when it was just the two of us after my dad left. So, when I was like 4 or 5, 6, I never saw my mother naked. She would not let me into the bathroom with her until she had a bra and slip on. She just was very much like that. And all of my mother's friends called her the queen. And so, but all of that sort of went out the window when she drank, because she would she was an alcoholic. She became an alcoholic when I was like 7, 8. She started drinking very heavily, very frequently, and it just got worse and worse. And all of that sort of, you know, well, you know how that is when someone is drinking to excess, the way that they're behaving, everything changes. So her sense of, impropriety, whatever, that kind of went out the window. But generally speaking, when she was sober, she was very proper. And right there at the table at the restaurant, she was like, show me where. So, over my t-shirt, obviously I put her fingertips over and she could feel it. And I mean, she looked so scared. And I had never really seen that in her before. And she left the table and went and called her doctor at the payphones, when we had payphones. And I went in that day, and the doctor did not like the way it felt and referred me to a surgeon. I went to see the surgeon, and the surgeon scheduled me 2 days later. So there was this sense of, yeah, I don't like that. Family history, let's get that out and test it. So it was scary. And that first surgery, my mom did not come with me. She was somebody who also, she really, I don't think, had the resilience or the tools, coping mechanisms to deal with fear in that way. And her dad died when she was 13, and her mom died when she was 28. And she lost her family of origin really early, and I think there's a lot of trauma there. And then my uncle Richie, her brother, died very suddenly of a heart attack when he was 53. So it was just a lot of loss, and I think her response to that was to avoid and deny. And so she did not go with me. But that first surgery, the surgeon was lovely, a woman. She explained to me everything that was going to happen. She was she's like, I'm going to be really careful about, how I go in case you at any point in your life have children and want to breastfeed. I'm going to be really careful about everything. And the scar is going to be tiny and thin, and it's going to fade. She was very reassuring in all of these ways. And she, went in and did what she did, and it was benign. And really all that came from that experience, aside from the fear of it and the fact that my mom could not show up for me there and be with me while that was happening, was that I learned very, very sensitive to anesthesia. They could not rouse me for hours after, and my breast was tender for a few weeks, and that was it. This was just this thing that had happened, and then kind of life went on. My mother would not get a mammogram ever. She never did. And I would beg her, especially after that happened, especially after I had that surgery, because every time I would go to the doctor and they would ask about my family history, I would say my maternal grandmother died of breast cancer, and next question, how about your mom? I don't know, she won't get a mammogram. And the look on the doctors' faces when I would say that, and also the technicians, when you go in for a mammogram, for years and years when I would go in and get a mammogram, and still, but it's different now because my mom has passed, but they would ask me about my mother's history, and I would say she won't get a mammogram. It was the same interaction with all these different people, where there's just this shock, of really, yes, she will not do that. So I would ask her, sometimes she would say to me, what do you want for your birthday, or what do you want for Christmas? And I would just say to her, honestly, Mom, the only thing I want is for you to get a mammogram. I just want to make sure you're okay. And she would get angry with me. She would say to me, breast cancer is not going to be the thing that gets me. And sometimes she would hang up. Sometimes she wouldn't speak to me. She'd get really, really upset and frustrated with me because I would be persistent in asking her to do that. And so 5 years later, I found another little pearl-shaped lump in the other breast. And kind of same course of events, went back to the same doctor. She scheduled me very quickly. And there is, it's very scary when you feel something like that inside your body, and then there's like a wait time until you can get it out and have it tested, or until they can do a biopsy. There's a lot of it kind of makes you realize how much you want to be alive and how easy it is to take that for granted. So I was very fortunate at this point in time. I had, health insurance and all of that. So I'm not really even addressing that part of things yet, although there were bills around all of this, but that's not even the part of the story I want to really focus on with this aspect. So I go in for this second surgery, and again, my mother doesn't go with me. And they had in the medical record that I'm really sensitive to anesthesia. And so they gave me a little less. They told me that that's what they were going to do. And what I can tell you is that I counted back from 100. Those of you who've been under general anesthesia will recognize that. I think the last number I said was 97, and then boom, you're gone, right? At a certain point, I felt this unbelievable pressure and pulling in my chest, pulling like I can still remember the feeling. It really felt like, if you could imagine somebody was trying to like pull your soul out of your body or something. It was just the most uncomfortable, intense feeling of pulling and pressure. And I was freezing. I was so cold. It's the coldest I've ever been in my life. And I started to hear conversation, and I could hear music, songbird, and, I could hear my doctor talking to one of the nurses about weekend plans. There's music and I realized there's like a sheet between my face and whatever was happening to my body. And I realized I'm awake and the surgery's still happening. And I was strapped down. They strap you down when you go into a surgery like that. They strap your arms and legs down, obviously, so you don't move at any time. And so I wanted to say, I'm awake. I can feel what you're doing. And it's not that it hurt. There wasn't pain, but it felt so wrong, like the most kind of wrong, horrible feeling I can describe to you. Like, waking up on the other side of the veil kind of a thing, or what I would imagine it's like to be buried alive, just that thing where you're separated and you can't communicate with people on the other side of the veil, and I became afraid that it would start to hurt and I wouldn't be able to do anything, say anything, move. I just have to be there frozen, taking it, And I was trying to speak and to say, I'm awake, I'm awake. I can feel what you're doing. But the part of your brain that controls language, and it's called Broca's area, by the way. That's the part that, the part of your brain that controls language. There's different parts of language, right? There's processing words and information. There's forming and uttering words. That's where Broca's area comes in. So I could understand what was happening around me, and I knew the words that I wanted to say, but I could not make those words come out of my mouth. So whatever the anesthesia does, it shuts down that part. And so I remember trying as hard as I could to say, I'm awake. And while I could not get those words out, I did manage to get some kind of sound out. And it was enough that I heard the doctor and the nurse talking to each other, and then I was gone again. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a bed. There were curtains closed around the bed, and someone was sobbing. I heard the sound of sobbing, and then I realized I was sobbing. And a nurse came in, opened up the curtain, came in, instantly, took my hand and told me I was okay. And she was incredible. Nurses are like, I just don't even, I have experienced this now at times in my life that were the most painful and scary. Nurses are like, they're the best of the best. When my mother was dying, I don't know what I would have done without the nurses in the ICU. So anyway, she came in, she took my hand, she was just very reassuring, told me I was okay, told me, I was like sobbing as a normal response to anesthesia, like everything's fine, the surgery went well. You put her hand on my forehead. She's very maternal. And I remember like wishing that my mom was there, that I had that kind of mom who would like, of course, be there, but it's not the mom that I had. It's not that she didn't love me, just people are complicated. And so she stayed with me, and she, was asking me questions, really simple, like, were you born in New York? And did you go to school here? And like, what, do you have any pets? Like just very simple stuff. And I started to calm down and feel more like lucid and okay. And then the doctor came, and she said, we found a second tumor underneath the first one that we did not know was there. So we ended up having to give you more anesthesia, like halfway through. And I said to her, I woke up during the surgery. I was awake. And she said, oh, no, that's not possible. She looked very kind of like, and I said, no, I did. Like I heard you talking to the nurse about like your weekend plans, and I heard Songbird, and she was like, she went white, her whole demeanor changed. She went from being reassuring and, kind to looking really alarmed. And it was so strange for me because all I really was looking for, I was a 26-year-old. I just wanted her to say that happens sometimes, or that's never, but it's okay. Like you're okay. Just something reassuring, comforting, something. But she didn't. She was very much like, I have to go check on another patient. And she just flew out of the room. And I realized much later in my life that she probably was worried I was litigious, like I was going to sue her or something. I wasn't, not even furthest thing from my mind. Okay, so the reason, and this is nothing, I don't think I've ever written about this before. The people who are closest to me in my life know the story, but it's not something I've really talked about very much because it's a terrible story. It's a terrible story, and I've had nightmares ever since. And that surgery was, I'm 53 and I was 26, and still to this day, it's not, all the time. I'm not plagued by it, but it's frequently enough that it's a thing, that I'm used to, where I will be having a dream where something horrible is happening and I'm trying to speak. I'm trying to say no or help or stop, and I can't make any sound come out. And I'm in that awful state of like being terrified and not having any, no sound coming out. And I'll wake up screaming. That's just a thing that has happened ever since. So when I read about this Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield plan to only cover anesthesia for a certain amount of time, which is the most heartless, unethical, disgusting thing I can think of. Well, one of them anyway, for a health insurance company to set people up, to either potentially have that kind of experience or have to pay out of pocket for any additional anesthesia it's the lowest of the low. It is disgusting. And I just felt sick to my stomach when I read that was a policy that they had not only floated, but decided they were going to enact as of February. And it was the day after Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, was shot dead in the street that they announced they weren't doing that. Now, of course, we had already decided not to do it. Come on now. This whole conversation has happened in the wake of this, this death, because of the absolute lack of ethics, compassion, morals, concern for human beings who are in the healthcare system. It has everything in the United States, unfortunately, has been horribly impacted by unchecked capitalism. It's just now what has happened with, privatized health insurance, which is what we have. We do not have universal health care here. Again, only developed country in the world that does not have some form of universal health care. There are systems where there's universal health care, and then you can also opt for privatized health care if you want to. And there's no reason we couldn't have something like that here. There's no reason we couldn't have like Medicare for all, but if you wanted to have if your employer wanted to provide something and you wanted to opt in, you could. Or if you just wanted to pay, we could figure this out. 72 other countries have figured it out. We could figure it out. The reason we don't is because these are corporations, and like everything else here, it's about making money. And lobbyists and politicians taking money from health insurance companies and big pharma. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. It's a disaster. And the people who are paying the price are people like us. And, people without anything. People on the fringes of society, poor people, forget it. There's no safety net. There's no safety net. And these companies don't care about those people. And even people who have health insurance, there are co-pays, there are, it's like, do you have a PPO or an HMO? What's your deductible? What are your maximum out-of-pocket costs? Like, oh, sorry, we're going to deny that medication for you, even though you've tried every other. It's the amount of effort and time it takes to fight your insurance company that you are paying for is outrageous. It's like, if you ran your business like that, I'm a small business. Like if I ran my business that way, I'd be out of business. Like, you can't treat people like that, but you can in this country, in the healthcare system. So yeah, people are angry. They're really angry, and they want to talk about that violence. It's not about, it's like the hand wringing over the shooting and Luigi Mangione, it's like there's a reason that people were so enraged in their response, because there are millions of people who are being caused harm. There are, I think they estimate like 68,000 people a year who are denied life-saving health care that we don't hear about. So it's not a surprise that people are angry, and that this conversation is happening. It needs to happen and it needs to change. Whenever the idea of universal health care is floated, it is shut down in our country. What you hear right away is, oh yeah, you think that's so great? You'll never see a specialist. You'll wait 6 months to see a specialist. Well, again, there are ways to work around this. You have universal health care, and then you have the option of paying out of pocket if you absolutely feel like I need to see a specialist and I can't wait 3 months or 4 months. There are ways to work that are better than what we have. They may not be perfect, but they're a lot better than what we have. And people in other developed countries are not going bankrupt because of medical debt. They may struggle. I've heard, I've been having this conversation now for the last, week and a half with a lot of people in Canada, people in like different parts, New Zealand, Australia. It's not that like there's any country where everything's perfect, but you're not seeing what we have here by any stretch of the imagination. You are not seeing over 500,000 families going bankrupt every year because of medical debt. That is not happening. So we have a serious problem here. And the reason that the conversation gets shut down is, guess why? Who is benefiting from privatized health insurance? Just ask yourself, who benefits from that? It's the same. You just follow the money. So these companies, they're making a lot of money. They're making a lot of money for the people at the highest levels, the CEOs and, all of their shareholders and people with stock options. Those are the board, the board member. Those are the people that they're serving. They're not serving the people who are dying, who are sick. If you start looking at the conversation that has been happening, there are so many people who are talking about, even like, my child had leukemia and needed a feeding tube because she couldn't keep food down most of the time, and the company would not pay for the additional supplies that I needed in order to maintain the feeding tube. Now, I know what it is because my mother had one at the end of her life. I might start crying at some point here because it is infuriating. It's infuriating in a way that makes you cry because it's so wrong. Like, it is so absolutely without humanity that this is what's happening to people. So a feeding tube, if you need one, and no one wants one, okay? But if you need a feeding tube, there's a lot of things that go into keeping it clean and safe. And I was reading this article, this woman was sharing, like, they wouldn't cover the other things that she needed. And the only way she could get coverage for the feeding tube is if she only gave her daughter the formula. If there were days where her daughter felt well enough to eat, like a little toast or something, and she gave her daughter a little bit of like solid food, then she couldn't have the feeding tube covered because it was elective at that point and not medically necessary. It's like, where are we? Where are we as a society if this is how we're treating people? And if we have people in our society who get really sick and are trying to figure out, what do I do here? Like, the company won't cover the medication that I need. So if I want to pay for it, I can either pay for that or like my electric bill. I can either pay for that or I can like put food on the table for my kids. I can pay for that or I can like not be able to pay my rent. Like, no one should be in that situation ever. In a developed country, in the United States of America, the, beacon of hope for the rest of the world, we're not, okay? That's like the PR. That's the country's PR. But if you live here, that is not what is happening. It's not. And it's just about the only place where there seems to be like any kind of bipartisan agreement here is in with this issue, because it impacts everyone. It impacts everyone. Doesn't matter, your political affiliation or anything else. And certainly it impacts people with less money the most. But if you ever look at the way things are billed, if you ever look at your bills, like, it's crazy, like what is being billed for different procedures, for different medications versus like what it ends, it's nuts. The whole thing it's a mess here. And so I also was sharing about when my mother got sick. My mom, breast cancer did not get my mother. As it turned out, she was right. It was ALS that got her, and it really came out of nowhere. I mean, I have some theories about what happened, because that was one place where she did go and get tested. She did get the genetic test to see if she had the genetic marker, and she did not. 85% of people who get ALS don't have a genetic marker. They don't know. It's Lou Gehrig's disease. That's what ALS is. It's a motor neuron degenerative disease, and there is no cure as of now. And it's brutal for the person afflicted, obviously, but also anyone and everyone who loves the person afflicted, because it just ravages you. With my mother, and I was saying she was always really put together. She got, the first thing that happened for her is she got, and this is often sort of like the beginning, the beginning bell, if you will. She got bulbar palsy, which affects the muscles of the throat. And so what happened for her is she started to have a difficult time enunciating, speaking at a normal pace. And what was really weird, this all happened during the pandemic when it began. So I was in Los Angeles, she was in New York, and it was always the case that she would start drinking at like 5 p.m. New York time. So for all of my years out here, I moved in 2001. I was always doing that math. I would make sure I spoke to my mom at like midday Los Angeles time, so that it wouldn't be past 5 New York time, because I didn't want to speak to her if she had been drinking. And what I started to notice during the pandemic and during this time, which was like May of 2020, is that she was slurring no matter what time of day I spoke to her. And I thought, oh God, maybe because the world is shut down, she's just drinking, she's day drinking, like I didn't know what really, but that's what I thought. And then eventually she told me that she was having some trouble with her speech. And so that was the beginning. And I'm not going to talk about this part right now, but she blamed me, which was devastating. She blamed me for her ALS for a year, which I will start crying if I talk about that for too long, but I'm writing about it in the memoir. So it was just a brutal, horrible experience. And I couldn't, when she first got the diagnosis, which was in June of 2020, she didn't accept it at first. She was just like, that's not it. That's not what I have. I'm not feeling anything except this difficulty, like speaking. So she was in that sort of denial mode for quite a while, and blaming me. And so that began a year of, Zoom meetings with different doctors and all these, it took on a, life of its own. And I couldn't get on a plane and go see her because it's a pandemic. And until we knew exactly what was going on with her, the only way I could have gone is if I got there, checked into a hotel, tested again, then saw her, then went back to the hotel, tested, then flew home, went to a hotel, tested, before I come back to, it was just, there wasn't any way to make it happen until later. And I ended up at the end of her life, we were able to visit her in August of 21. And by the time I was able to actually get on a plane and go and see her, it was horrific. She was just bones, just couldn't. She was using an app to, she would type into the app and it would speak whatever her sentence was in this robotic voice. And it was just awful. It was just really, really painful to see. And then that August when I went home, I looked at her and realized, like, she needs a feeding tube. She's not getting enough nutrients, really obvious. She was like emaciated and dehydrated, just all the things. And so we went and got her a feeding tube that week that I was there. And then it just began this process of a really rapid decline at the end. And the last month of her life, she was in the ICU, and this is still during COVID. And so I was with her for that last month of her life in the ICU. I would fly back to Los Angeles for like a night or two, make sure everybody was okay, and then get back on a plane. And I was with her 12 hours a day in the ICU. And people all around her on that floor were dying. Everyone was in different stages of dying, mostly due to COVID. A lot of people on respirators, and my mother was, on a ventilator for almost 2 weeks. They did manage to get her off the ventilator, and she was supposed to use a BiPAP machine after that, and she hated it. So there's just a lot of things that happened that I learned from that experience. Again, the nurse is unbelievable. The social worker there, unbelievable. The doctors, everybody was great. This was at Mount Sinai in New York City. But afterward, a lot of things happened along the way. I'm going to try to talk about this. The night that she, I don't know if I can do it. The night that she died, I made it back. It was not expected. We were trying to get her home for one last Christmas. And so I had flown back. It seemed like she was stable. She just needed to be using the BiPAP machine, but she hated it. And in her case, her jaw was slack. And so they had to Velcro the BiPAP machine on, and it had like a visor. She felt really claustrophobic. And it also, what a BiPAP machine does is it forces oxygen into your lungs and it sucks CO2 out, right? Because you can't do it anymore on your own. She hated it so much, I think, because when they got her off the ventilator, her own breathing was a lot more, it was shallow. And, she was getting oxygen, but like, you really have to clear that CO2. If you don't, you start to hallucinate. It does things to your brain, to your mind, and it'll kill you eventually. So she was stable. They managed to get her, which is unusual for somebody, it's not necessarily, it's not an easy thing when someone's been on a ventilator for like 10 or 12 days or longer to get them off of it and have them move to a BiPAP machine and breathing on their own. So it was kind of hopeful that she was seemingly doing all right, but that the day that I left, the morning that I was going to go back to LA for 2 nights and then fly back and get her home. That was the plan. And so I flew back. I had to fill out 29 And I remember how many pages it was, 29 pages of paperwork to switch her into the hospice network. And I mean, hours of phone calls, just phone calls. I was calling from the airport. I was calling when I landed. I was like, I came home to like look at my kids, but like I was just doing that. And speaking to the hospital and all those things, and I was having equipment delivered to the house, and all the things that need to happen. But I mean, hours of time on hold, waiting, being transferred to this person and told, no, this is not the right department, and you need to do this and fill out this form and email it here and take a picture of that. I mean, it was incredibly stressful. And as I was doing all of those things, and I had completed all of those things, she took a turn because she wasn't using the BiPAP machine the way that she needed to be. And I got a call to get here, where she was, to get to New York. So I went to LAX. I got on the first plane that I could, and I did not know if I was going to make it back in time. And I did. I managed to get there to be with her for the last few hours. But there were so many things along the way that happened that added stress to an already devastating situation. Losing your mother, to just a merciless disease, it's just like you're already digging, as deeply as you can just to sort of get through, and just to have this other stuff going on where you're having to like step away from, to try to make phone calls and like send, scan paperwork. It's nuts. And there was even a situation there at the end with the hospital and the cremation place. I mean, it was one thing after another of, this is not the way this should be going. There was a nurse at the hospital after my mom had passed, and I'm there in the room, and like, and she was telling me that I should tell the cremation place that my mother was in the hospice part of the hospital, but she wasn't. They hadn't transferred her there yet because she declined very quickly there at the end. And so she wasn't in the hospice part of the hospital, but the nurse was saying to me, just tell them that she is. The doctor's going to sign her death certificate really quickly here. Otherwise, if you don't do that, they're going to put her in the morgue, in the refrigerated vault until they can get here. But if you tell them she's in the hospice part, then they'll come right away. I mean, the trauma, of like thinking to yourself, I can do something so they come and get my mother's body quickly. And if I don't do this thing, then I have to think about her being like, put into a drawer. It's just, nobody needs that thought or that image. There were so many things like that along the way. And then after, for like months after, I was getting phone calls from the insurance company asking me if there was an estate to pay for the out-of-pocket costs from the hospital. I mean, it was just relentless, and again, like lacking humanity, lacking compassion, just people that are calling and their job is to like suck every penny from your family that they can. This is just not how it should be for anyone, anywhere, and I know I'm crying, but I'm not even, it's okay. Like, it's cry worthy, like we should all be upset that anyone going through the stress of either being sick themselves or having a loved one who is sick, having to deal with the additional stress of a system that is without compassion, that is violent. It's all of us should be this. Everyone should be able to agree on at least this, that we need and deserve something better And until we have it, we're nowhere. I mean, if you do go look at the essay, I linked everything. And you can see it's embarrassing, okay? There's like, 10 countries. They compared like 10 countries to the United States. And it's countries like, the United Kingdom and Australia, New Zealand, Germany. I feel like Lithuania is on there. There's like, 10 countries, and they're all at this sort of like pretty similar line, and then there's the US. It's like way down. It's embarrassing. And our government should be embarrassed. Our government should be embarrassed. But part of what has gone wrong here is we are the United States of incorporation. It's all corporations now. The capitalism is just out of control. Everything is for sale, even democracy. It's all for sale, and there are places like in rural parts of Missouri, there are places where there's only one OBGYN in a district. That's 4 counties in a district. That's 37,000 people. And if you just kind of go with like the national average, right? Cut that in half, 18,000 girls and women. Let's say 30,000 people in a district in 4 counties, about 18,000 girls and women, 1 OBGYN. 1 for 18,000 people. So in places like that, what's happening for a lot of women is like they want to go in and, have their annual pap smear, make sure they're okay, like maintain their health. Well, you can't get in. You can't get an appointment. So your option then is to drive 3 hours to find another OBGYN who can see you, and then 3 hours back, which means losing a day of work. And not everyone can afford to lose a day of work. That's where we are. Not everyone can afford to lose a day of work. They're trying to put food on the table. And then let's say they do. They say, okay, I'm going to take a sick day and I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go and I'm going to get myself checked. If you have cervical cancer, you need all kinds of things, right? Like any cancer. I mean, there's no formula for this. Every situation is different. But, most cancers, if they're at a certain stage, you're going to need chemo and radiation. Well, where are you going for that? How are you going to do that if you're trying to work? Like, there is no safety net for people. And I don't know of anything more violent, So, yeah, I think that we should be talking about all of that. But I think what we need to be really focused on is, this is why, if you were someone who was alarmed by the lack of compassion around the death of Brian Thompson, this is why there was a lack of compassion, because there are so many people. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying to you, this is why. Because there are so many people who are victims of a violent system, and the CEOs are getting rich off of this kind of treatment of people. And it's like, yeah. We've been trying to have a conversation about gun violence too. Every time there's a school shooting or a mass shooting, we're trying to have that conversation. The same people who are wringing their hands over this, it's horrible. Look, again, I'm never going to be like, oh yeah, but you can't wring your hands over that and then not wring your hands when children are shot dead at school, and shrug your shoulders and say, we have to learn to live with this, and put like thicker doors on the schools and get metal detect. Like, there needs to be a real conversation about what is going wrong here, because it's the same thing going wrong there. There's a reason that when Sandy Hook happened, we didn't change things the next day, and it's money. It's money, it's lobbyists, it's unchecked late stage capitalism. It is killing us here. It's killing us. And I'm sorry to tell you, but the incoming administration, this guy's trying to appoint 14 billionaires. 14 billionaires. This is the last thing we need. It is the last thing we need. And that's what we're going to get. And just in case, you were someone who thought he was going to lower groceries, he already said, he hasn't even gotten in and he's already said, I'm probably not going to be able to do that. This was a nightmare. It is a nightmare. And this is not what we needed, but this is what we're getting. And I don't know. I mean, there is some part of me that is hoping that maybe what is about to happen is so horrible, we'll finally band together and stop screaming at each other on the internet and realize, like, all this stuff that's happening, social media, it's like it's designed to keep us screaming at each other, so we're not paying attention to that. If we all got together and said, wait a second, I'm not going to stand for that. This is not acceptable treatment, and started fighting the people in power instead of each other, things might get done. But that isn't happening. So I do think we're at a breaking point. And I think if we don't get together and start having these really important conversations and dropping all this crap, and just understanding this is not okay and this is not acceptable, we're going to be seeing these random acts of violence more and more. I really do, because I think we've crossed a threshold of it's not sustainable. And I think people voted for change because they were so desperate for this to change. This was the wrong move, though. These are not the people that are they're not open to this conversation at all. And so I'm definitely worried. I'm sad, I'm really sad, and I'm worried for my kids, your kids, if you don't have kids, whatever, like all of our kids, you, me, all of us here. I'm worried. And I think things are probably going to get worse before they get better, if they get better. I'm hoping they do. I do tend to be a hopeful person. I'm having to dig deep lately to feel hopeful. It's been hard. And I do feel, the last thing I'll say, because I do want to try to end on some kind of, hopeful note here, is if you're looking for, like, what can I do, think small for a minute. Like, think about, is there anyone on my block who could use some help? Is there anyone that I know of in my immediate area who is alone? And start there, because that's what we've stopped doing, I think. We're not caring for our neighbors. We're even fighting with our neighbors. If you look on Nextdoor, which I am not on that app because I've never been on that app. There was one day that I was on that app. But even there, people are just screaming at each other. So, I think that if you're looking for something meaningful to do, start there. I have a neighbor on my block, and he's on his own, and he's old. And, people in our society in that situation, they're not going to be okay. If you don't have somebody advocating for you, I know this really well now because I've lost my mom and my dad in the last few years. So my mom in December of 21, just passed the anniversary of her death, was December 7th, and my dad in July of 23, July 15th. And, all I did really for the last year of her life, last year of his life, was advocate, get on the phone, fight for things. If you don't have somebody doing that for you, you're done. You're done. You will die. You will die alone, and it will not be pretty. So if there's anyone in your immediate area that you know of that could use some support, start there. Just like do tangible things for one person. Because if everybody started doing that, there's at least a safety net starting to happen, even if it's doing it for each other, because the system isn't serving us. And I can tell you the system isn't serving us at all. Yeah. And, also, look, I mean, I think most people who are listening to me, reading my stuff, whatever, are like-minded. But, wherever you're coming from, I know we all have different beliefs about different things. And sometimes people are like single issue voters, or there's, it's like, I think that we all need to kind of recognize this is not where we are at this point in time. Like, got to really try to think about the greatest good and do anything and everything you can to try to move in that direction. We are in some very scary and concerning times. And so I think maybe that's like a good place to start, is to, if you aren't already, find someone, find a neighbor, and see what you can do to help them if they need help. There are a lot of people. It's not going to be hard to find someone who needs help in your world. You might be that person, but if you aren't and you have anything, it's not even about money. It could just be driving a neighbor to the store or to a doctor's appointment. I just did that this week. It's it's not that hard. I know we're all busy. It actually will make you feel hopeful if you take an action like that, because it'll just remind you of your own power. And yeah, I think we need to be passing that on. So that's where I'm going to end this. There's so much more to say. I will tell you, if you haven't taken a look at the essay, I linked so many things. There's just there's a story. I'll just say this one last thing. I'm pretty sure it's the last link that I shared. There's this doctor in Montana. He's an oncologist, and it was a ProPublica story called "Eat What You Kill." I linked it. It is astonishing, not in a good way. Go take a look at that. If you're wondering how depraved we can get here in this country, go take a look at that. There's an oncologist who's basically been working at this small hospital, and basically giving people cancer diagnoses when they don't have cancer, and then having them treated with chemo. There's no biopsy anywhere in the person's medical. I mean, it's unbelievable. And this guy's being protected because he's made so much money for the hospital. This is where we are. It's bad. It's really bad. So I'm sorry. I know I wanted to end on a hopeful note. Find a neighbor. There's your hopeful note. Find a neighbor. I love you. I'm here. If you need support, you know where to find me. And I hope that you take good care of yourself. I'm sending you a lot of love. Until next time.